Hi, I'm Professor Rose, a lecturer in the Department of Political Science, and this is part of a series on knowledge about elections from the Center for Civic Justice. So let's talk about the Electoral College. Our founding fathers, when they wrote the U.S. Constitution, were trying to balance the competing interests and rights of all the citizens by forming a republic with mechanisms in place to ensure that there would not be tyranny of the majority in a direct democracy, while at the same time enshrining democracy as a value. And, this is a tricky balance. And one of the mechanisms they formulated at the 1787 Constitutional Convention was the Electoral College, though the phrase Electoral College is not actually mentioned in the Constitution. And to understand the Electoral College, you have to understand how the founders set up our federal government. So let's read what the founders decided on in the Constitution. In Article 2, Section 1, we read, "Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in Congress." And the electors may not be those members of Congress. Okay, so each state is given a number of electors, or an electoral value. That number is equal to the number of members that that state has in the U.S. House of Representatives, which is based on a state's population, plus 2 senators for each state. So each state's electoral value is equal to the number of House representatives plus 2 for their senators. Okay, we'll get back to this. So the Electoral College is meant to function as a sort of temporary mini Congress with one job every 4 years, and that is to elect the president. Well, hold on. When you vote in a presidential election, don't you vote for the president? And the answer is no. When U.S. citizens go to vote, they are voting for the electors of the candidate for the party they have chosen to vote for the president. And then those electors will cast their vote for president. So each elector will individually make a choice as to who they will choose. And they are free to choose someone other than who has won the election. Or at least that's the theory of it, right? So Alexander Hamilton, in Federalist 68, he argues that, yes, the Electoral College has to consider the will of the people, but they also have to consider the fitness of the person being chosen. And you have to ensure that the person chosen will be of virtue and competence and ability and act for the good of all. And so if the elector believes the person chosen is unfit, he or she is free to vote for a person not chosen by the people if that person is unfit for office. At least that's the theory of it, right? Now, our first 2 presidential elections were for George Washington, and he was elected unanimously by the Electoral College. But after Washington, you have the development of partisan politics. Our politics breaks down largely into 2 factions, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. And when this happened, you had the parties in the states choosing electors who would then be bound by the party to vote for their party's candidate. Today, those electors are party members and party bosses and party loyalists. So you have electors chosen based on party loyalty, not based on their independent ability to decide on the fitness of a person for president, as Hamilton envisioned. And these are called pledged electors. They have pledged to vote for their party's candidate and not for anyone else. And we see the theory and the practice of the Electoral College, they actually conflict, right? Now, the states realized that they could maximize their power and their relevance in these elections if their electors voted as a bloc. And this leads to the establishment of a winner-take-all system. And what this means is that whichever party's candidate wins a plurality of the electors, then all the electors will go to the winner. So when the presidential candidate wins a state by a slight margin, It's the same as winning it by a landslide. So whoever wins the plurality, the most votes, wins the whole state and gets all the electors. And what this means is that the Electoral College does not really function as the Founding Fathers envisioned. And if there's this system of giving electoral value to each state, then why have the Electoral College at all? Why not just go straight to a popular vote, and whoever wins the popular vote wins the election? Well, there's several reasons for this. Remember, the founders were worried about tyranny of the majority at the expense of the minority. And the reason the number of U.S. House members that each state gets is based on population is because we want the U.S. House to represent the democratic will of the people. But the U.S. Senate is different. All states have 2 U.S. senators, which obviously is not based on population, but based on the idea that all states are equal and have equal rights. So the U.S. House gives a disproportionate amount of power to the large population states, and the U.S. Senate gives disproportionate power to the minority or the smaller population states, and legislation must be passed by both. Well, the Electoral College adopts this same principle, that yes, the electoral value is based on population, but then you add 2 more electors for each state. So the electoral value for each state is indeed based on population, but with this tweak of adding 2 more electoral votes to give the minority, smaller population states a bit more power to keep in check the majority. Because we don't want a system where the majority can just do whatever it wants to the minority, right? So that's the greatest argument in favor of this system. And it's hugely important. The Electoral College, if you look at the map, if our Electoral College was based solely on population or a national popular vote, where would the candidates for president campaign? Well, only in the larger population states, right? At the expense of the smaller states. So then smaller states' issues won't get addressed. That's the argument. So this system of winner-take-all encourages the presidential candidates to campaign in as many states as possible, not just New York, California, Texas, and Florida, the large population states, not just all of the major media markets to gain popular vote in a national vote system. Otherwise, you would only have urban issues addressed, right? Only urban issues would dominate presidential politics at the expense of rural areas whose issues like agriculture and small town issues would be largely neglected. Now, another argument in favor of the Electoral College, some scholars have argued that because candidates have to appeal to the entire country and not just the larger states, the larger population states, that this system moderates policies and it avoids extremism so as to appeal to the broad swath of the American people rather than driving up vote counts with their base in their party's safe states, right? Okay, well, that's the good, right? Okay, fair enough. But there are some big problems with all of this, right? With the winner-take-all system, if the winner of the Electoral College wins his or her states by a small margin, but the states he or she loses by a very wide margin, then you can have the winner of the presidency not win the majority of votes in the country. In other words, the winner receives fewer overall votes than the loser. And this has happened 5 times in history. The last 2 this century, the 2000 election of George W. Bush and the 2016 election of Donald Trump. Now, this is not very democratic, right? The winner should get the most votes in the country, and does usually, but it's not necessary to win the popular vote to get the 270 electoral votes needed to become president. Another argument against: does this system really protect the smaller minority states? Many scholars argue, no way, it protects the swing states. So think about this. California and New York are safe states for Democrats. Republicans have no chance to win in those states, right? States in the Midwest and South are safe states for Republicans, and Dems' chances of winning in many of those states are almost nil. So Democrats take their safe states for granted, and Republicans take their safe states for granted. Well, then, if you're a presidential candidate, where are you going to campaign? And which states' issues are you going to try to appeal to? The swing states. The states that have a good number of electoral votes but are up for grabs. And what critics of the Electoral College argue is that what this means is your vote in a safe state really does not mean very much. It means a great deal less, arguably, than someone voting in a swing state. Again, not very democratic. And so, is there a way to abolish the Electoral College? Well, yes, but it would take a constitutional amendment to do it, which is virtually impossible. So some scholars argue that there are reforms that could manage some of these problems, right? There is a movement to get the states to pledge to give all of their electors to the popular vote winner. And a few states have actually already signed on to this. Another reform is to split the electors in each state proportional to the vote received. And Maine in 1972 and Nebraska in 1992 have changed their system away from the winner-take-all system, and now they split their electoral votes. But no other states have decided to do this. Why? Because it diminishes their block vote power in the system. So there are good arguments on all sides as to whether or not to keep the Electoral College, to abolish it, or to reform it. And reasonable people can disagree. Of course, if your candidate wins, the system is working just fine. And if your candidate loses, well, we need to abolish the system, right? So there is much more to learn about this topic and many more arguments. For more information, you should visit constitutioncenter.org. You should also enroll in a course on American government in the political science department and attend events at the Center for Civic Justice to be educated and engaged in government because it matters. I'm Professor Rose from the Department of Political Science. I'll see you next time.